people of the United States. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Hello, and welcome to George Washington Slept Here, the civic education podcast from Freedom's Foundation at Valley Forge, where we explore American history, civics, and the idea of liberty through conversations with some of our favorite thinkers, writers, and leaders. I'm Jason Raia, Chief Operating Officer at Freedom's Foundation and host of George Washington Slept Here. Our format is simple, a long-form conversation with a friend of Freedom's Foundation where everyone can learn something new. Before we go any further, just a little bit of information where you can reach us. If you like what you hear, we ask you to please tell a friend and show your support. You can donate by going to freedomsfoundation.org/podcast, where you can find our archive of episodes. You can also email us at gwshpodcast@gmail.com and visit us on social media at FFVF on X and Facebook and Instagram at Freedom's Foundation. Today's interview is with Honorary British Consul Oliver St. Clair Franklin, CBE. Hello, Oliver.
Hello.
Our conversation today is going to be structured in a way that will keep us on track. We want to explore your origin story. How did you become the person sitting here before us? Your current work as Honorary British Consul. And then we want to talk about the state of America today and maybe some lessons from history that you can help us explore. And finally, we end with a quiz, which hopefully will allow listeners to learn something about you they never knew. And so let's start. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Washington, D.C., and raised in Washington and Baltimore, Maryland. My family is a Virginia family. My mother's family is from Cortland, Virginia, and they have the surname Turner. And of course, Nat Turner,
very famous last name
was from
in
the
American
area.
history.
I can't say I'm a quote relation, but I can certainly say with confidence that some of my ancestors certainly knew him. Mm-hmm. So I feel comfortable. And my father's family is from Lynchburg, Virginia, which is in the western part of Virginia. They moved to Washington, D.C. before the First World War. And my mother, who had raised on a farm, went off to Virginia State College. And then when the Second World War came, she moved to Washington. And that's how my parents met.
Okay. So both from Virginia.
That's right.
But met in D.C.?
Met in D.C.
Excellent.
Right.
So tell me, who were the most important influences in your young life?
I think certainly my father, who was a minister and was the dominant, and I mean that with a small d, not a large d, but certainly was a mover and shaker in the civil rights movement, and was one of the younger ministers who was challenging the established Negro power structure of the time. So I think he was a very, very important figure in my life. And then, of course, you know, most of the civil rights people that I grew up with, the kings of the world, I should say Bayard Ruskin, because I just saw that marvelous biopic of him on Netflix.
About the planning of the Washington speech.
It was really beautiful. And Barack and Michelle Obama were the executive producers. So when I saw that, I thought, I think this is going to be very good. Mm-hmm. And it was. So they were primarily the influences. I think in terms of philosophers, which I read a lot of. I always had a challenge with John Locke because of his belief in private property. And, of course, my whole origin story is kind of based on this whole notion of private property. But, yeah, I think the people from the 60s were and Ralph Bunche, I remember meeting him as a child or as a young man, and that was earth-shaking, just to shake the hand of a guy who was a hot shot at the UN who spoke a couple of languages. That was very influential.
So for those of us who don't know him, tell us a little bit about him.
He grew up actually in California, went to Howard University, was an internationalist, and really became the number 2 person at the United Nations. And he was African American and was the only one at the UN at that time. And I think his value, his contribution was particularly when Africa and the third world nations were becoming independent. He wasn't a European, he wasn't white in that sense, but he was really able to fly off to the Congo and Ghana and all of India and these places and help negotiate. So he was a very important fellow, very intense, very brilliant. Like all of them, smoked a lot, and from my perspective, died too young.
Yep. So you have this really interesting group of individuals who are influencing you from the civil rights movement,
That's correct.
from the UN, your father.
Yeah.
How does that influence the decisions you make? You go to Lincoln University.
Correct.
And what do you choose to study?
Well, I didn't want. I just wanted to choose basically liberal arts. But let me back up. I went to boarding school.
Okay.
A school called the Vohi School in Denmark, South Carolina. It's now a 4-year college. And what's missing from the narrative are the number of African American kids whose families sent them to these boarding schools in the South. Palmer Institute is a name a lot of people will recognize. Fork Union Academy, which was a black military academy. You know, the first kids going to the Naval Academy in the West Point had come, and the Citadel had come out of Fork Union Academy. And it was very interesting to me, and I've just begun to reflect on it a bit, is that my parents were really in the forefront of of integrating schools in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
And so I was all excited at 13 or 12 or 13 that I was going to go to this, white school. And then my parents said, nope, you're not going. You're going to go to boarding school, which was okay. It was fun. It was only about 20 years later that I realized they had calculated that the first group of African American kids in these white schools were going to be ignored, and the struggles they were going to have were going to be amazing. My two brothers didn't go to boarding school. They went to regular public schools.
Interesting.
But they didn't want me to be an experiment. And years later, I asked my mom, she's like 82, and I said, is that the reason I didn't go to City College, which was a big high school there, or Poly? She said, yep, we knew that the first generation that went were going to be the unsung heroes, and we didn't want you to be an unsung hero. But then I went to Lincoln University, which is the oldest black college in the country. And what's exciting about Lincoln is it is the only historically black college that's not in the bosom of a black community. And the reason is that when the Presbyterian ministers were looking for a plot of land to acquire to create a college for the collegiate training of colored men, and that meant classics and Latin and Greek and geometry and philosophy, no one would sell them land because they believed that this was an impossibility, that these young men didn't have the mental capacity to understand Plato and Aristotle and Pythagoras. And they finally found a fella who was an African-American farmer who lived in southern Chester County. And in 1850, they passed the Fugitive Slave Law, which meant that you could essentially go and grab someone who was even a free African-American and drag him south to be sold. And this guy, Mr. Amos, had like 6 children, and one of his children disappeared. And they searched and searched, and they came to the conclusion that the child had been snatched. So they went to Canada, which is what everybody did. And he passed away up there, and he still had this farm. And when his kids realized that people were looking for a place to create this institute for collegiate study, they said, we'll sell you our farm at a discount. Okay. And so that's how they got the land.
Lincoln,
it's in the was when I was there. It was in the middle of the cornfields.
Right. So, and that's, for those who don't know, that's not too far from here, where we are in
30
Valley
miles.
Forge.
It's 35 miles. It's probably 30 miles from Valley Forge, and just as beautiful as it is out here. And our new mayor, who comes in on January 1st, went to Lincoln University too.
Yeah. So, so you go to Lincoln, and what do you study?
I really studied by default economics.
Okay.
And we had this really cool guy from Princeton named Philip Bell, who was, I didn't realize it at this time, the head of the economics department at Princeton. I had no idea. We didn't have Wikipedia. He was just a cool guy, and he became my senior advisor because I took labor economics, and I took marketing and theoretical Milton Friedman theoretical economics with him. And it was very odd. He said, "What are you going to do next?" Very calmly. And I said, "Well, I got admitted to a couple of law schools." And he says, "Well, do you want to go to law school?" I said, "No, not really." And he was the one that suggested Cambridge.
Okay.
And I said, "Cambridge?" And I was shocked. He said, "Sure." And I said, "I don't know." And then he said, "What about Edinburgh?" I said, "That sounds a little better." So I ended up going, which was great, to Edinburgh, studying Africa in the African Center, because everybody was about Africa in the 60s. And my tutor at Edinburgh, who was from Cambridge, says, "You really should go to Oxford or Cambridge."
Interesting.
I said, "Here we go." And I didn't know how to do it. And he says, "Just decide where you want to go, write them a note, and let them send you the exam." So I decided I wanted to go to Oxford, and they sent me they sent to him a set of exams, and one Saturday I spent 5 hours answering these questions. And the beauty is they were all essay questions, and they were all interesting.
Okay.
And so I figured, you're not getting in. Just have fun. And I enjoyed it. And then I passed the exam, and then I had to go down for interviews. So I then actually fulfilled the dream of this professor that I had by ending up going to Oxford. And that was a lot of fun, too.
So you end up at Oxford via Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And it is, I can only imagine that there were few Americans there and even fewer African Americans who were there.
Correct.
So I'm curious, what was your experience in England and Scotland like compared to your experience, which was right in the
the
heart
middle
of the civil rights movement?
Correct.
The assassination of Kennedy, it's just before the assassination of King.
Correct.
Right.
Totally. The first thing, and I'm speaking to you after having been out all these years, was that I brought my Americanness with me, and I was never an American. I was always a black man. If you said to me in the 60s, "You're American," I said, "I'm not an American. I'm a black man," like that, because countries were getting free in Africa. Well, I get there, and guess what? I'm really an American. And it was shocking because there was no camaraderie amongst black people I met. They were polite. But in America, if you're a stranger and you see a black person, you walk up and say, "Look, man, I'm from so-and-so, I need help." They help you. There, you say, they may help you, they may not help you, they hope you're well, they're all polite. That was a real shock to me. But I got to know a lot of the Indians and Africans and Chinese that were in Edinburgh. And Oxford was different because it's the only place I'd been where everybody thought I was a wealthy aristocrat. Because
just made that assumption.
They just made that assumption. They figured if you're here, you must be the son of the president of the country or the son of the king, right? And that was interesting for me because it was a twist of everything I thought I would have understood. I thought they're going to say, "Why are you here? Do you belong here? Are you intelligent?" They all thought I was brilliant because I was there, which was a relief because I didn't realize when I got there I wasn't. And so it was an interesting experience. We had 5 African Americans. And we had, Bill Clinton was in his last year when I was in my first year there. And I assume we had 50 or 75 Americans. But I was unique because I wasn't anything. I wasn't a Rhodes Scholar. I wasn't a Marshall Fellow. I wasn't a blow and blow. I wasn't a this. And people would say to me, "What are you?" I say, "I'm a Methodist." So it helped me see how American I was, which is an experience I think most people that alienated, and African Americans in the 60s, we were trying to get real. We were trying to make America what America should be. And in the process of doing that, there was that alienation, which is a normal process. You need to get out amongst other people to realize just how American. I had a guy who I bought a paper from every morning. He called me sir. Then he started calling me a Yank, and I never spoke to him. And I said, "How do you know I'm a Yank?" He said, "Look at your shoes." And I realized as I walked around with my head down, looking at all the men's shoes, but looking at all the shoes, I could tell the American by the shoes.
Yep. And I think that's fairly still true today. That you can tell even if an American tourist does a good job from the ankles up, you can usually look at their shoes and
you can tell.
And know. So you're at Oxford and you did something fairly unusual, and that was attempt to reach out to the Prince of Wales, Charles, at the time, who was he was at Cambridge?
No, he hadn't. He was on his way.
He was on his way.
Yeah.
And you wrote to him.
I just wrote him a letter, and I got a response from his secretary saying, "Come in and just have tea." And on a Saturday, I went in, a young guy. I was pretty relaxed. I was anti-establishment, so to speak. The smartest guy I ever met in my life. Here is a guy that was very introspective, and I think people understand that now, who thought deeply about issues of the day, and doing his apprenticeship, his long apprenticeship, sort of like the long 18th century, isn't it? Doing his long apprenticeship, took on roles and challenges that were ahead of his time. He was the first guy in the UK to talk about organic farming. And what is so interesting is he created an organic farm, okay? He understood the resources at his disposal and how to, and I don't want to sound too businesslike, deploy those resources to prove a point. And so, he's now king. And what you find is this very thoughtful guy with all these pressures on him, with a slimmed down monarchy because Prince Harry is out, Prince Andrew is out. So he's got 2 key people in the senior level that are out. And here he is with all these various pressures from the Commonwealth and situations going on socially within Britain, and this great rethinking of empire. Was it good? Was it bad? What does it mean? How does it impact on how we think about ourselves as being good Brits? All of that. And as the head of state and the symbolic head of the country, I think you'll find out. He's only been in a year, but I think you'll find out he'll handle those pressures very well.
And you actually met with him not long after he became king?
Yeah, just saying what I do is you're not friendly.
Right.
The whole point is to work together on a common project, right? So my relationship is good. I developed very strong staff relationships, and then once we have something going with the staff, when it's time to, then the Prince of Wales would come in for 20 minutes. Now he's king. You'll go see him for 2 minutes.
Right.
But that's the difference. But it's fine. But he has hired a very sophisticated Nigerian, a woman who is of Nigerian heritage, to head up his sort of Commonwealth office. And so she's the D&I, diversity person on the staff. And I work with her, and I work with a young man who's also very capable, who is the Deputy Private Secretary for Global, for International. And as long as you can keep those relationships and keep focused on what's at hand, then you'll have a very successful relationship with senior royals.
So let's go back. I'm very curious how you became the honorary British consul and what that means.
Okay. Well, I guess the honorary British consul, in a funny way, just means that you're a junior diplomat. You should, by statute, be a citizen of the country.
Okay.
You, as the honorary, you're here, so you don't disappear every 5 years and a new person comes in. And these are roles that Americans are finally beginning to recognize as being really extremely important if they're done well. We have the first consular corps in the United States in Philadelphia, and we have 82 members.
Okay.
So that's quite impactful.
Right.
What we primarily do is trade and investment, because whatever they tell you, it's all about how can we get more trade going between our two countries. And then there's a consular bit where somebody has gotten themselves in jail and they have one phone call. I want to talk to my consul. And then I get the call, or although most of it is done digitally now, or the frantic parent whose kid realized that she needs a visa, or he needs a visa to do that junior year abroad in Britain.
Right.
And school opens in a week. Those are the fun ones. And then that's a consular. And then the other component is the public diplomacy. And that is what I'm doing now, for instance. And that's the real fun part, getting out, hearing people, talking to people. And while I try to give some of my knowledge, whenever I'm in a car after these events, I realize that I've learned a heck of a lot more than I've probably given out. So that's also the good part. Now, and you leave government like 55 or 56 or 60, you're out. So, most British ambassadors that you meet are under 60. Okay? So what you have are very young, from my perspective, but really talented people in the Foreign Office, in the British Foreign Office, who have more energy than you can believe. So I work with them, and I also work very closely with the ambassador in Washington. And British people are very nice. I mean, I've never really seen any of them explode in anger. I've seen them leave the room and come back calm, but I've never been in a situation where the conversation is very heated and somebody,
What's the famous keep calm and carry on?
Keep calm and carry on. So it's fun working with them, and it's just an honor to be the honorary consul. And you're on everybody's A-list, so that helps too.
So a good part of what you do is that business side. You're trying to help American businesses and British-based businesses connect and work together, and sort of 1 + 1 = 3 whenever possible.
I mean, that's the whole point. And there's so many inherent barriers to people doing business abroad. I mean, British business people, when they arrive here, even though they've studied it all their lives, they forget how vast America is. And I tell them, you're going to fly to California. when you land, think of yourself as going through customs.
Right.
Because the attitude is different. People say things differently. So just switch your head. It's sort of not like going from London to Manchester, for instance.
Right. It really is that European equivalent.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so the second thing that surprises them is our federalism. I know you've been in a lot of your things. You talk about federal power and federalism, and how each state has its own individual rules for the type of product you want to distribute in that state.
And you have places like California that have very different rules in some cases.
And so a big part of the process is, always letting them know it's the biggest economy in the world. So no matter how frustrating it's going to be, just remember, once the gates are open, you're good.
Right.
You're going to have a ball.
It's worth the
worth it. It's really worth it. From the American side, the challenge now is, now that they've left the European Union through the Brexit process, in the past, the story was, put your factory in the UK because you have access to all of Europe.
Right.
And they speak English. They sort of speak English in the UK, or they think we
a version of English.
Right. They think we sort of speak English. But now the issue is, still put your factory there, because the UK and the EU are beginning to harmonize. So you'll be able to get your boats into the EU. It may take a little bit longer, but not that much more. So the story has changed, but it's good.
I'm curious, being an American who is part of the British consular services, and you've done this for a long time now.
Yeah, I've done it for 28 years.
So you really come with this wealth of knowledge. But I'm very curious. You went to school in London, in Oxford. The relationship between the United States and England, we've always talked about, at least in the 20th century, about this special relationship.
The special relationship.
Thank
you, Churchill.
Yes, but it didn't have to be like that. After the American Revolution, they could have remained implacable foes. And they didn't. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how do the British look at the relationship? I think we may better understand how we as Americans look at it. But how do the British look at the relationship with the United States? And that it was once a colony, but then it becomes this prevailing power in the latter half of the 20th century.
I think a lot of it, I think the First World War had an awful lot to do with British perception. Because even after 1776, we had the War of 1812. I think it happened around the Civil War was also very interesting, because the question was, where would Britain stand in the Civil War? On the one hand, so much of their industrialization took place from cotton that came from the slave South of the United States. And that ran the mills in Manchester and Lancaster and these places and helped it. But on the other hand, and the British were very curious and very standoffish here in the Civil War. They kind of wanted to see what would happen. They sent lots of journalists to the North and the South, and they would go to the North, get a pass, go to the South, interview Lee, and have total access. And I think after Gettysburg, and once they realized, then they began to tilt toward the Union. And I think people in the North were very pleased. People in the South were not. They had their ships being built in Liverpool for the Confederate Navy, right? So, but I think the shift really took place in the First World War, when finally we were able to send troops in, because it was very iffy about what was going to happen. And the Americans, who didn't spend so much time in Britain, but spent a lot of time in France, began to tip it. And it was sealed, a relationship was sealed at the end of in the Second World War, when they believed that they were the Greeks to our Romans. That was a very famous statement among the British elite, is Sure, the Americans are powerful, and they are more powerful than we are, but we're their Greeks. We are the people that are going to, quote, temper their emotion and shape them into being the world power in our image.
Interesting.
So I think the Second World War was very good in the British.
I imagine that World War I, of course, World War I has this devastating effect on Britain
Correct.
in the loss of a generation who went to
An
war.
elite generation,
Yes,
too.
Yes. And then you have World War II. But one of my favorites, I remember, before the Americans joined the war, there were many Americans who went over and were flying with the RAF.
That's
and then
right.
more and more come over.
That's
and,
right.
And of course, the great cry was that the Americans, were they were overpaid, oversexed, and over here. To which the Americans responded and said, "Well, the British are underpaid, undersexed, and under Eisenhower."
I always thought that was very funny. Yes.
But it really is born, this special relationship, this special friendship of these two nations who could have been enemies is born out of the fire of World War I and World War II.
Correct.
And they realize that in some ways they very much need each other, and they made each other better. The 21st century has seen lots of challenges. You reference the fact that they are contending with empire and
Correct.
the legacy of that
That's
empire.
correct.
The United States is contending with its own history.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think, one of the places where I think there's more agreement than most people would think, amongst whether it's left and right or different political parties or different ideas in history, is most of us want to tell the full story.
Correct.
And that's something that has not always been true. That there is this, there can be a difference in emphasis, but the telling the story as it happened, not running away from it, is really important. And we see both nations sort of dealing with the convulsions from that. Politics in Great Britain are rough and tumble.
God, yes, it is. It's people resign on principle in the UK. You have to throw somebody out here.
Yeah.
Nobody says, I am a member of the president's cabinet and I disagree with this and therefore I'm offering my resignation. But that's a routine thing in the parliament in Britain, that people say, oh, we have disagreement, I'm offering my resignation. We're both countries are going through a reevaluation of its history.
Mm-hmm.
We're going through it in terms of our being a racialized society, and I think Britain is going through it in terms of how they're looking at empire.
Mm-hmm.
In 1928, which was the apex, Britain controlled a third of the world.
Right. The sun never set.
The sun never set on the British Empire.
Right.
It was a real opportunity for people who didn't have opportunity in this little island to go abroad and become powerful like kings. Here's a kid that is 18 or 19, and someone says, we'll put you in the Indian service. Mm-hmm. And at 21, he's assistant governor of Madras, which has 20 million people.
Right.
And so there was so much opportunity for empire. But what's so interesting is the amount of scholarly work. And I think what's important about what you do here is the fact that you base a lot of what you do on sound scholarship. Mm. And once the scholars start looking at, scholars disagree on interpretation of facts, and it's always great to listen to them because they're both coming from very grounded places. But the scholars in Britain are beginning to change history. There was a book by a woman who just got a major award who looked at the Mau Mau in Kenya. Mm-hmm. And realized all the atrocities that were committed by the British against them, the hangings and executions and just things you would never consider Mr. Poppins, a mild-mannered Brit, doing to mm-hmm. people, but they did it. And once this book came out, you begin to see some of the Mau Mau detainees sued the British government and they won. They actually got an award for a compensation for the pain and suffering. Here in this country, African American scholars and people that are studying African American history are coming up with interesting and really a lot of insights. My frustration is it takes so long for that book, that scholarly book, to get into the public consciousness. So someone does a great scholarly work and they're a professor and the book is out, they do conferences and they may win a prize, but they've got to then move on to the next project.
Right.
And that book alone, if it had more public acknowledgement, could do a lot to change.
Well, and being able to have those important conversations where people do disagree,
Exactly.
are really how we move forward.
Exactly.
So whether it's that published book and then there's a conversation and and the number of them that make it into the public consciousness, I always have found that really interesting. How does someone become David McCullough?
Oh, well, my goodness.
Who's certainly a brilliant writer, brilliant researcher.
Really.
But we need more of him.
We need more of that. That's true.
Yes.
And we need to train scholars how to be public intellectuals. And I think what we're missing that we had in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, Eric Hoffman didn't really go to college, but he wrote a lot about history. So we need to train young people who are bright and very competitive how to articulate in a way that how a non-academic person who's not an expert on the topic and who probably gets their news from social media or whatever, how to talk to them. And David McCullough had the ability to show his enthusiasm. I ran into him in 30th Street Station, and he's just walking. I said, Mr. McCullough, it's just a real pleasure to see you. And he was, as I said, what does it take to get you to come and speak? He said, you have to talk to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is British for the Treasurer.
Right.
He said, that's my wife. We both laughed so hard, just the humanness and the openness that he had. I agree.
Yeah, I think that would go. I think that would go a long way. The number of books that I've picked up, whether they're political science or history or psychiatry, whatever, that are really just written for other scholars, as opposed to the rest of us, who are interested but are not necessarily schooled in the specificity that someone who is an academic scholar is. I'm curious about a program that you started that helped bring Philadelphia public high school kids to experience London.
Right, that was good.
What were you trying to achieve, and what was the contours of that program?
I learned something. At that time, we had Prince Andrew here for the Queen's Golden Jubilee.
So her 50th?
Her 50th.
Right.
And when you have a senior member of the royal family, if you really want to get their attention, you got to show them what the money earned on the visit will do in a charitable way. Because they keep a tally on how much people raise. I mean, it's like you're sitting around the table in August in Balmoral and you did this and you did that and you. So we went to the Prince and said, we're going to have a gala, and what we'd like to do is create a fund to let secondary, it's what they would say in Britain, secondary school students go. So we selected a school, Masterman, which is the best school in the city, and we sent it off to the palace, and the palace got back to us and say, these kids can go on their own. They don't need this program.
Right.
And I'm thinking I need kids that'll be, I'm thinking differently. I'm trying to say, I need a successful program. I need bright kids.
Right.
And then they said, what is the worst performing school in the city of Philadelphia? Okay. And so we went through the process and we found this school in North Philadelphia High School. And they said, that's where we want to bring the prince, and that's where we want the program.
Oh.
So it was
Because they wanted to
difference.
affect.
Exactly.
They wanted to have an impact that
That's
they wouldn't
right.
have had.
That's right.
Okay.
So we went to the principal, great guy, and of course he didn't believe Royal Prince was going to show up, and the school was a mess. I said, relax, everything's going to be painted, there'll be grass. Sure enough, he went in, he met the students, got them, and they were saying things like, well, what's a royal prince? Just basic questions.
Sure.
So, and then we raised enough money to, over the next 6 years, have a select group of kids who we had to structure it so that during the year they would study Britain. So it had to be an after-school program. You need kids, and half of them are going to drop out. That's normal. But you need the group of kids that are going to get their passports and get on the plane to have shown a long-term commitment.
Right.
So they can So it worked very well the first year and the second year, and they would go to Buckingham Palace and meet Prince Andrew. And by the third year, we needed a school. So we found a school in Hackney, which is a very multiracial part of Britain, of London. We discovered that the kids at Hackney hadn't been to all the places that our kids were going, like Stonehenge.
Right.
We'd get
because nobody's a tourist in their own neck of the woods.
But they had no idea.
Yeah.
Now the issue is we need more money because we can't have our kids going and having a counterpart, and then they say, okay, bye, we're going off to Stonehenge.
Right.
We'll see you guys tomorrow. So the program became one where once we partnered with a similar school, they had similar economic challenges as our kids did. So it worked out very well, and every one of the students in the program did some post high school education. Some went into the service, most went into university, and I had every now and then some young person, not so young anymore, runs across the street and said, Mr. Franklin, I'm so-and-so. Don't you remember me? And yes, I do. And then they talk about what an influence it was in high school, spending 3 weeks in London. Most of them didn't have passports, and they have to go through the process and getting on. Most of them had never been on a plane, and how that helped them focus. And that's the reason I've always been an advocate for young people getting on a plane. Get a passport.
Right. And I know from my own experience, I used to I started traveling when I was 16 with a high school trip. We went to Paris. We flew in through London. And then I've been traveling ever since. And then when I was a high school teacher, I used to lead groups. And so I would lead groups through whether it was England or France or Spain or any of the Italy. And it was just amazing to see through their eyes their experience of history, being in a place that was referenced, whether that is Stonehenge or it was the Tower of London.
Well, that's always a favorite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, to go see the crown jewels.
Right.
But even in Spain, going into a bull ring and being there and then meeting the people. But one of the almost universal experiences were, as great as those trips were, you come home and often realize that how very lucky you are.
Correct.
To be an American, to be, for all the hardships, for all the things you may need to overcome.
All the challenges, that's true.
There is something special. There is something, and I would argue that it's built in our idea of freedom, our principles of liberty, those founding documents that are so aspirational, even though we continue to work toward their fulfillment, and we have not fulfilled them, but that we work toward greater and greater freedom for more and more people, that there is often the realization, and that has certainly been my experience, particularly when I have been in parts of the developing world.
Yeah.
where you look and you say, okay, we have challenges, but even those who are challenged have a great deal of freedom, a great deal of benefit that they get from being an American.
I try to explain it to Europeans and Africans, which is where I spend a good deal, I used to spend a good deal of my time, is that America is an aspiration. It is an idea. It is the only country on earth that is an idea. Most countries are ethno-national or cultural national, but very few countries are founded on an idea where anyone can be an American. Now, people here have visions of what an American is supposed to look like, but I tell them, just get here.
Yes. Yeah,
and you're an American,
and that's exactly right. That is this idea, grounded in freedom, grounded in individual choice.
Correct.
That unites us. It is not blood.
That's right.
It is not just geography.
That's
even
right.
though we have this geography,
That's right.
It's not because your family for 40 generations was born in this it is those who become American, that then, no matter what your background, when you achieve citizenship, if you come here from elsewhere, you are just as much a citizen
you got the same
as
vote.
Someone who came on the Mayflower.
That's right. You've got the same vote. And so this is why I think our students need to study the Enlightenment more, because all of these concepts are ideas. I mean, wars are essentially fought over ideas. You look at the people that are dying in Ukraine and Russia because Russia has the idea Ukraine is a part of Russia. The Middle East, everyone has an idea of what the country is. So we need to take ideas seriously and study ideas, because therein lies the stuff of material reality. Because what are we thinking when we're not thinking? I mean, it's just ideas in our head that are motivating us, and we have culture and other things. But we need to study ideas, and even the Enlightenment, which I have issues with, but as a system of thought, the notion that you would have a society that didn't have a king. I mean, the United States of America, every other basic society in every part of the world, now there may be a few exceptions, so the academics that are listening to me, I agree. There are a couple of tribes somewhere where they elected their ruler. I admit that. But if you look at all the countries in Europe, Africa, all of them had this patrilineal king or head, and there was no individual concept of freedom. To have a country, even with enslaving most of its, or 20% of its population, but to have as a document the concept of individual freedom is what makes it aspirational and fantastic, as a document.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And something to work toward. And to think that even in that earliest generation, there were those who recognized, I'm gonna talk about someone you have, I think, some admiration for, John Adams, whose family, I can't remember the exact story, but they raised a young woman who had been a slave, but
Correct.
they had granted her
Right.
freedom immediately. Raised her when she was old enough. She was able to go and marry and raise her own family. For the Adamses, they recognized, as did many of the founders,
Correct.
that slavery, the ownership of other human beings, was a huge problem, and did not agree with the principles that they were fighting this revolution about, and they fought for it, but others didn't, and so it took a long time. But John Adams specifically made moves as part of American foreign policy to support his idea of freedom for all tell us about it.
By supporting Toussaint Louverture. I think the founding era is so important, and I've become fascinated with the latter part of the 18th century because of all the moving parts. Here is the most productive island in the world. It's called Saint-Domingue. It shares this island with Spanish, but this part of it is French. And this island is so productive, and so much sugar and other staples are exported to France that France becomes kind of wealthy as a result of this island. And in this island, they worked their enslaved Africans so hard that they had to replenish 50% of them a year. The women were working so hard, they couldn't have children. They didn't have the energy, but they were they were purchasing them from the African slavers, so we must be clear about that. They were purchasing them from the African slavers and bringing them. And then there are thousands of French people living on this island as overseers. There are thousands of mixed race people who are sons and daughters of the overseers and the Africans. And then the Africans decide to rebel. And that rebellion, now there is a rebellion going on in France.
Right,
so
I was going to say the French Revolution is happening.
The French Revolution is happening. And what's so exciting is they decide to free all Africans in enslavement. So they hear that in Saint-Domingue. And of course,
they make the mistake of believing it.
They believe it. This rebellion was 10 years. 10 years. And during that 10 years, thousands of French from Saint-Domingue came to Charleston, Norfolk, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. So many Frenchmen came that Philadelphia had 4 French newspapers.
Wow.
4 French language newspapers during this time. In the beginning, George Washington, because they were obviously coming to the U.S. for support, was supporting the slave owners because they were the ones that were suppressing it. But as it got more intense, John Adams and his team decided that they would support Toussaint Louverture in his quest to free Saint-Domingue from France. And Haiti is the indigenous Indian name for mountainous land. So when they got free, they acknowledged the people that came before them by naming it in the language Haiti, which is mountainous land. And what's so interesting about this period is that you have senior level black people from Saint-Domingue and senior level white people from the U.S. meeting on equal terms. This has never happened before.
Right.
Didn't happen again until the 1960s. And what's so interesting was watching how the Louverturian government cut deals they could get the arms that they needed from the Adams government. So one deal they cut was the Southerners didn't want to do it because they felt that if they had an independent black republic, first thing they're going to do is sail into Charleston and cause insurrection.
Right.
So they're all upset. So Adams negotiates with the Louverturian government that they wouldn't send insurrectionists to Charleston because now these guys have a government to run.
Right.
They've got to get people employed. They've got to get exports going. They've got to do everything you do when you're running a government. So it was a very interesting period. Now, of course, Thomas Jefferson scuttled the deal because when Napoleon came in, he decided he wanted to re-enslave everybody. He had this idea. He was going to create a land in French North America, which is the Louisiana Purchase, where he was going to move all these French people there, and the enslaved people in Saint-Domingue would produce the food to feed everybody there. So Napoleon sends a big army to Haiti, and he's defeated.
Right.
So he withdraws his army, and he's now got battles in Europe, and he decides, my dream is dead. I'm not going to have that vast territory in North America. And that's how we got the Louisiana Purchase, that he got it But what's so interesting about history is it also allowed the U.S. to double its slave size. So with the Louisiana Purchase, you get Mississippi, you get all these areas which are really good cotton growing regions, and you begin to see slavery move from Virginia, North Carolina, and move out to Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, those areas. So it's so interesting about history that the black people defeat Napoleon. Napoleon then sells this land to Jefferson, and in the process, it opens up more opportunity for slave owners to move and get more acreage. And that's also what's exciting about history, watching the consequences of decisions that people are making.
Right, and of course, then we have the Missouri Compromise
Absolutely.
in 1820, and so the southern portion is allowed to have slaves, the northern portion is not, and it is certainly the history for the next 40 years.
Exactly.
From the time of the purchase, 50 plus years of American history is going to be dominated by this slave question.
Exactly.
Slave states and free states. And
how are you going to enter people? If you get a slave state, you need a free state
right.
to balance it.
And then we end up at the Civil War.
Exactly.
And we know the history even after that is complex, and there are lots of decisions that are made that the consequences are not anticipated.
Correct.
And, so what do you think the lessons are that we need to look to take, maybe from history generally?
Well, I think let's talk about democracy. I think that's good because, all of our discussions, not all, but most of our public discussion about our political scene is about democracy and will democracy survive?
I'm never a fan of that hair on fire.
I don't
We've
like
survived some very difficult times.
We have been through tough times.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a couple of things are important. Number one, in democracy, you have to admit loss. If you say, like Trump does, the election was stolen, when all the evidence proves that it isn't, that's not democratic. Because the whole point of democracy is you have winners and you have losers. And what you expect is the losers to regroup and strategize again and come back at the next election.
I always think of William Jennings Bryan, who ran
How many times did he win? 4 times.
4 times
Yeah.
he ran, lost every single time.
Yeah. But he had influence because the opposition would take some of his ideas,
right,
because they had to debate them in the public forum, you see. And the second thing about democracy is compromise.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution and their battle over enslaved Africans and property did the compromise that in 1808 they would abolish the international slave trade.
Right.
All right? Now, that was a compromise. Some people wanted to abolish enslavement immediately.
Right. But they said 20 years after the Constitution.
But they cut a deal.
Yep.
So that the Constitution could hold.
Right. Right.
And so compromise and admitting loss are, I think, foundational for a democracy to survive and thrive. And we've got to get back to the concept, and this is where Ronald Reagan was very good. Ronald Reagan says, there are no enemies in politics, just opponents.
And that's a big difference.
It's a big difference. And we've got to get back to the notion that a Democrat is not my enemy, Republican is not, MAGA is not my enemy. They are opponents. And once you get that attitude in, then all the other things like being able to lose and regroup and compromise can emotionally drive us forward. So we've got to turn the temperature down. Yes. and challenge the raising of temperature of social media, because that's a whole new medium for us. I mean, 20 years ago, I never would have thought I could get my news from a podcast.
Right.
Didn't even know what it was.
Right.
Okay.
Or the people who, exactly, they get their news
That's
primarily from whether it's Facebook or Twitter or, what have you. And sometimes very legitimately. I remember what was a few years back, we would talk about the color revolutions around the world.
Oh, exactly. I remember,
and
sure.
Georgia.
Sure.
And very legitimately, I got more stuff from Twitter that was good news, that was solid journalism, than I was able to glean from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Correct.
Or any particular local, and that was wonderful. And yet it has morphed recently into something very different.
Yeah.
And that almost in some ways it feels like a throwback to whether it was early America and the broadsides where everybody had their own printer, literally, and they would pay printers to print things that they wanted to see. And the same thing when yellow journalism of the late 19th century. Sure. It's sort of like social media.
Exactly.
That's the 21st century version.
Right. No, I agree. And these were all new technologies too, because you could print stuff up quickly and get it out there. But so if we bring the temperature down and let people meet. I finally met a mega Republican.
Okay. What was that experience like?
That was okay. I mean, I said, let's just have a cup of coffee and talk. And you know what? When you sat down and really talked, the one thing they liked about Trump was that he gave it to the elites, because they understand that my generation of elites sold them a bill of goods. And I don't mean me personally, but my generation said to farmers in Iowa and Indiana, look, we should send this stuff to China because they're going to be able to produce it much cheaper than we are. And we are going to retrain you all for new jobs.
Right.
That was a promise. That promise was never fulfilled. So you have a whole group of people in the Midwest and the South, primarily white working class, who feel betrayed. And guess what? They're right, because us East Coast and West Coast elites, and I do believe in that East Coast, West Coast elite, I believe we should have sent, I believed as an economist that production should go where it could be cheaply produced and you have good quality, because then the prices will be lower for us consumers. What I didn't understand is consumers needed money to be able to buy the product.
Right, and if they don't have that job,
if they don't have that,
yep,
who cares about how cheap a good product is if you can't do it? So that our generation, my generation, so I accept it, bought this idea, and we never followed up because we never did the legislative work, which is tedious and hard and doesn't make headlines, of making sure Congress and the Senate pass laws with funding to actually retrain people. It's hard to do, and it's not sexy, and it doesn't make headlines. But we failed to do the grunt work to make sure that we fulfill the promise.
So what I find really interesting about that story is your willingness to listen, to have a cup of coffee and listen to the concerns of this person.
Yeah.
And be able to understand them, even if that doesn't mean you're going to vote with that person.
I'm definitely not voting with them, but I can tell you that if we could get people in a room without cameras and just let people trust their feelings.
Right.
Trust their feelings. If we can hear them, then we can understand that there is common ground here that we can begin to structure some policies around. Most people don't want more government. I mean, this is just not in our DNA.
Right.
Okay? Most people want less laws. We need to allow individuals to solve problems.
Right.
Without having a superstructure telling you how you should solve the problem. And then if we have individuals understanding that they are going to solve the problem, then people can sit down and realize everybody has agency here. We also have the agency to scuttlebutt it, and we'll all lose. Or we have the agency to really sit down and try to craft something that everybody won't love, but which will work for everybody.
And we're back to compromise.
That's right.
Oliver, this has been great. We always end with a quiz. It is typically the same questions that I ask week after week, which makes it fun to listen. But I want to start with a special question for you to explain to our audience, which is those 3 little letters after your name, CBE. Tell us what a commander of the British Empire is.
A commander of the there are several layers of honors, and the British Empire was founded by the king in the First World War to honor ordinary people for extraordinary service. And there are 4 levels. There are members, MBEs of the British Empire. They are people that do work in their local communities. There are officers of the British Empire. There are people that do a little more. A commander is higher. It means that I'm doing stuff on an international scale. And of course, the height is the knight, the knight commander of the British Empire.
So you're not a knight, but that means you don't have to, bring your horse and lance.
I don't have to bring my horse and lance.
Right. Excellent.
I just serve the king like you would with a bow.
Excellent. Okay. So here's our usual quiz. Excluding Washington and Lincoln, who's your favorite president?
Johnson.
Nice.
Lyndon Johnson.
Okay. Not Andrew.
Not Andrew. Not my guy.
What's one thing you would want every American to learn more about?
I would like for them to learn more about Reconstruction and the 14th Amendment.
Excellent. We're going to have a program on Reconstruction for teachers this coming June. So we're very excited about that.
No, this is good.
If you had not chosen your career as an economist and serving as British Consul, what do you think you might have done?
A history professor.
Love it.
I love history.
What's one pet peeve that annoys you the most? I have lots of them. So.
I'm trying to think of the one of many. My pet peeve, and this is really going to sound cultural, people that lean into their horns, their car horns. I was in a taxi with a guy, and he wasn't from this country. And he was constantly...
sure.
I said, man, look, you're in America, and you're in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
You don't have to lean on your horn. That's one of my pet peeves.
And as you know, most people in Philadelphia will do the opposite of what the horn is telling them
exactly.
to do. What is your favorite movie?
My favorite, any Godfather.
Okay.
Any one of them is my favorite.
You are in good company there.
Yeah.
What one thing about you would most people be surprised to learn?
That I used to play the banjo.
Oh, really?
Speaking of banjo,
we were looking at one earlier.
A 5-string. I don't much now, but when I was young in college, I had a 5-string banjo.
See, I would not have known that.
I love hoedown music.
What's one lesson from your life that you would most like to share with young people?
For every time you ask a favor, you probably have to do 5 favors for the person you're asking the favor from.
So remember that.
Okay.
Make sure you need it. You really need it.
But you need to treat people right well so that when you need something, they'll be there for you. Yeah.
So you've been lucky enough to meet a number of well-known historical individuals. Is there one historical person that you haven't met that you would have liked to?
That I haven't met that I would. Now, that's very interesting. That I haven't met historical. Probably Toussaint Louverture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Definitely.
Wow.
The greatest was Nelson Mandela, so I got to put that out there. I spent time with him.
You did?
Yeah. I mean, I had an hour-and-a-half conversation.
Wow.
I did a lot of listening, so let me just say.
Oh, sure. Why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
Final question. We ask this of everyone. Bourbon or Scotch?
Scotch.
Yeah, I figured it might be.
A single malt. Actually, yes, single malt. I know bourbon, but it's a little too sweet for me.
Oliver,
well, thank you.
Thank
Jason.
you so much. This was absolutely tremendous.
And good luck. And I just hope more Americans, and particularly parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, understand the work you guys do here for students.
Your lips to God's ears.
Amen.
Thank you to our guest, and thank you to our producers, Laura Kennedy and Sarah Rasmussen, and a special shout out to friends of the pod, Bill Franz and Robert Gleason. Thank you to all of those who make this possible, our listeners and our supporters. Please subscribe, follow, rate, and review George Washington Slept Here wherever you listen to podcasts, and tell your friends. Visit us at freedomsfoundation.org or email us at gwshpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you very much.